The silk wedding dress lay crumpled on the marble floor like a fallen dream. Min-jun's trembling hands held the farewell letter as cherry blossoms danced outside the window. "I choose love over duty," she had written. But would her forbidden heart survive the price of defying an empire built on tradition? If you're ready to dive into a love story that will break your heart and rebuild it, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you'd sacrifice for true love. The morning mist clung to the Han River like whispered secrets, and Min-jun stood at her penthouse window, watching the city wake beneath a blanket of soft gray. The scent of jasmine tea cooled on the marble countertop behind her, untouched, as her delicate fingers traced patterns on the cold glass. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it felt like a beautiful funeral. Her reflection stared back, porcelain skin framed by waves of midnight hair, eyes that held the depth of ancient wells. At 24, she was Seoul's most coveted heiress, daughter of the Lee conglomerate empire. The ivory silk wedding dress hanging behind her seemed to mock her with its pristine perfection, each pearl and crystal catching the morning light like tears she refused to shed. "Miss Lee, your mother is asking for you." The voice of her personal assistant, so young, drifted through the mahogany door like a gentle storm cloud. Min-jun's heart clenched. In 3 hours, she would walk down the aisle to marry Park Woo-bin, heir to the Park Industries' fortune. A marriage arranged before she could even spell the word love. The soft knock came again, more insistent. Min-jun's bare feet whispered against the heated marble as she moved toward the door, the silk of her nightgown flowing like liquid moonlight. "Tell her I need 5 more minutes," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of Seoul's awakening streets. But 5 minutes wouldn't change anything. 5 lifetimes wouldn't erase the memory of him. The man who had taught her that love could taste like summer rain and feel like coming home after years of wandering. Jae-hyun. Even thinking his name sent warmth spiraling through her chest. She had met him 6 months ago at a small bookshop in Hongdae, hidden among the narrow alleys where her family's influence couldn't reach. He was reading Pablo Neruda's poetry, his long fingers turning pages with the reverence of someone who understood that words could heal wounded souls. When he looked up, his eyes held the kind of depth that made her forget she was an heiress and remember she was simply a woman with a heart desperate to be understood. "You look like someone searching for something," he had said, his voice carrying the warm timbre of aged whiskey and honest laughter. The scent of old books and his subtle cologne, something woody and clean, had wrapped around her like a promise she didn't know she needed. For 6 months, they had built a secret world in the spaces between her obligations. Coffee shops where steam rose from ceramic cups like incense, park benches where they shared dreams under star-scattered skies, quiet bookstores where he would read her poetry in a voice that made her believe in magic again. His hands, callous from his work as a carpenter, would trace the lines of her palm as if reading her future there. "I don't care about your family's money," he had whispered one evening as they walked along the Cheonggyecheon stream, the water reflecting the city lights like liquid diamonds. "I care about the way you laugh when you think no one is listening, and how you bite your lip when you're thinking deeply about something that matters to you." But now, standing in her golden prison, Min-jun felt the weight of 5 generations of family duty pressing down on her shoulders like iron chains wrapped in silk. The Park family alliance would secure her father's business empire for the next century. Her marriage was not about love. It was about legacy, power, and the kind of stability that could only be built on the foundation of strategic unions. The door opened, and her mother, Eleanor Lee, entered with the graceful authority of a woman who had never questioned her place in the world. Her Chanel suit was impeccable, her pearls catching the light like captured moonbeams. The scent of her signature perfume, something French and expensive, filled the room with the weight of expectations. "Min-jun, darling." Her mother's voice held the kind of controlled warmth that could freeze or comfort depending on the circumstance. "The stylists are here. We need to begin your preparations." Min-jun turned from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. "Mother, you look pale, sweetheart. Nothing that a bit of color can't fix." Eleanor's eyes swept over her daughter with the calculating gaze of someone who had built an empire on reading people's weaknesses. "Woo-bin is a good man. He'll provide for you, protect you. Love will come in time." Love will come in time. The words echoed in Min-jun's mind like a death knell. She had found love, real love, the kind that made ordinary moments feel like poetry. But it was love that existed in the shadows, love that could never survive the harsh light of her family's expectations. The stylists entered like a quiet storm, their arms full of brushes and possibilities. Min-jun submitted to their ministrations, feeling increasingly like a beautiful doll being prepared for display. As they worked, she closed her eyes and let herself remember Jaehyun's voice reading her favorite poem. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. A text from an unknown number. The bookshop at 2 p.m. If you come, we'll find a way. If you don't, I'll understand. Always yours, Jay. Min-jun's breath caught. 2 o'clock. 1 hour before her wedding ceremony. Her hands trembled as she deleted the message, but the words had already carved themselves into her heart like a sacred promise. The makeup artist stepped back, admiring her work. In the mirror, Min-jun saw a stranger, beautiful, polished, perfect for the role she was expected to play. But behind the carefully applied facade, her eyes held the wild desperation of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to fall or fly. You look radiant, her mother murmured, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your father would be so proud. Min-jun nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of millions of people living their ordinary, beautiful lives. Somewhere in those streets, Jaehyun was waiting, offering her a chance at the kind of love that poets wrote about and dreamers died for. The choice stretched before her like an endless horizon. Duty or desire, security or soul. The life she was born to live, or the life she was born to choose. The wedding dress felt like a beautiful prison as Min-jun stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection fracturing into 1,000 possible futures. The Italian silk hugged her curves with the precision of a master craftsman, each crystal and pearl strategically placed to catch the light and every admiring gaze. But all she could feel was the weight of the decision burning in her chest like a secret fire. Absolutely stunning, breathed the wedding coordinator, her voice thick with professional satisfaction. The photographer will want to capture this moment. Mrs. Lee, perhaps we should. Give us a moment alone, Eleanor interrupted, her tone carrying the kind of authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms and social circles. The room emptied with the whispered efficiency of well-trained staff, leaving mother and daughter in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken truths. Eleanor moved closer, her fingers adjusting the delicate lace at Min-jun's shoulders with the tender precision of someone who had once dreamed of her own daughter's wedding day. You know, I wore my mother's dress when I married your father. It wasn't a love match either at first. Min-jun's heart clenched. Mother, what if there's someone else? Someone who makes you feel like you could conquer the world and find peace at the same time. Eleanor's hand stilled. In the mirror, their eyes met, two women separated by a generation, but united by the eternal conflict between heart and duty. Love is a luxury we can't afford, Min-jun. But companionship, respect, shared goals, these things build lasting happiness. Did you ever regret it? The question escaped before Min-jun could stop it. Marrying for duty instead of love. For a moment, Eleanor's composed mask slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. There was someone once, a music teacher. He had the most beautiful hands, and when he played piano, I felt like I could fly. She paused, her voice growing soft with memory. But I chose security over dreams, and I built a life that gave you opportunities one never had. The clock on the mantel chimed 1:30. 30 minutes until Jaehyun's deadline. 30 minutes to decide between the love that made her feel alive and the life that would keep her safe. I need some air, Min-jun whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft rustle of silk and the distant sounds of wedding preparations. Eleanor nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. 5 minutes. Then we must go to the ceremony. Min-jun's heels clicked against the marble as she walked to the private balcony, her dress flowing behind her like liquid starlight. The September air carried the scent of autumn's first breath, crisp leaves, and the promise of change. Below, souls spread out like a tapestry of possibilities, millions of lives intersecting in ways both beautiful and heartbreaking. Her phone buzzed. A message from Woo Bin. I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen, but I promise to be a good husband to you. We'll find our way together. He was a good man, she knew. Handsome in the way that magazine covers demanded. Intelligent enough to run an empire. Kind enough to send flowers on her birthday. But when he looked at her, she saw respect and strategic calculation. When Jae-hyun looked at her, she saw her soul reflected back, understood and cherished. Another buzz. This time, it was a photo from Jae-hyun, their favorite bookshop, empty except for a single red rose lying on the table where they used to sit. No words, just the image of possibility waiting in the spaces between what was expected and what was desired. Min-jun's breath caught as memories flooded back. The way Jae-hyun's eyes would light up when she laughed at his terrible jokes. How he would bring her coffee exactly the way she liked it, strong with just a hint of vanilla. The afternoon he had built her a small bookshelf with his own hands, each piece of which sanded smooth and joined with the kind of care that came from loving someone completely. I don't need your money or your family's approval, he had told her just last week, his carpenter's hands gentle as they cradled her face. I just need you to choose me. Choose us. Choose the life we could build together. But choosing him meant losing everything else. Her family, her inheritance, the security of a world where she understood the rules even if she didn't like them. It meant stepping into uncertainty with nothing but love as her compass. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Woo Bin stood in the doorway, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his expression unreadable. They had barely spoken beyond polite formalities in the months since their engagement was announced. You look beautiful, he said, his voice carrying the weight of duty and resignation. But not happy. Min-jun studied his face, seeing perhaps for the first time the man behind the air. Are you happy, Woo Bin? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I've never really considered happiness as an option. Duty, responsibility, honor, these things I understand. But happiness feels like a luxury I was never taught to want. What if we could give each other that luxury? She asked quietly. What if we could find a way to be happy despite everything? He moved closer, and for a moment, she thought she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. I've been in love once, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. With someone my family would never accept. I chose duty over desire, and I've regretted it every day since. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Two people bound by obligation, but united by the shared understanding of sacrifice. There's still time, he said quietly. If there's someone else, someone who makes you feel alive. Woo Bin, I'll handle our families. I'll take the blame, the consequences. But don't marry me if your heart belongs to someone else. The clock chimed 1:45. 15 minutes until forever changed. One way or another. Min-jun looked at this man who was offering her freedom at the cost of his own reputation, his own future. In that moment, she saw the person he might have been in a different world, under different circumstances. What about you? She asked. You're someone else? A sad smile touched his lips. She's married now. Has 2 children. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let love exist as a beautiful memory rather than a broken promise. The weight of his words settled over her like a gentle benediction. Here was a man who understood sacrifice, who had chosen duty over desire and lived with the consequences. Yet he was offering her the choice he had never given himself. I have to go, she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of decision. I know, he said simply. Whatever you choose, I'll make sure you're free to choose it. Min-jun gathered her skirts and ran toward the door, her heart pounding with the rhythm of possibility. Behind her, Woo Bin stood on the balcony, watching her flee toward whatever future awaited beyond the golden cage of expectation. The elevator seemed to take forever, each floor a countdown to the moment when she would step outside and discover whether she had the courage to choose love over everything else she had ever known. The taxi driver glanced at Min-jun through the rearview mirror, his weathered face creased with concern. Miss, are you sure about this address? You're dressed for a wedding, not a bookshop. Min-jun's hands trembled as she smoothed the silk of her dress, each fold a reminder of the life she was potentially abandoning. I'm sure, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the soul traffic humming around them like a mechanical heartbeat. Through the window, the city blurred past, neon signs reflecting off rain-slicked streets, couples walking hand in hand, ordinary people living extraordinary moments of their own choosing. The scent of her mother's perfume still clung to her dress, mixed with the lingering fragrance of the white roses from her bridal bouquet. But underneath it all, she could smell the approaching rain, fresh and clean, like the promise of washing away everything that came before. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. 17 missed calls from her mother, 12 from the wedding coordinator, 6 from her father's assistant. The world she was leaving behind was frantically trying to pull her back, but with each passing block, she felt something loosening in her chest. A knot of expectation that had been tied so tightly she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "We're here," the driver announced, pulling up to the narrow alley where the bookshop nestled between a traditional tea house and a small art gallery. The familiar wooden sign swayed gently in the breeze. Between the lines, the place where she had first learned that love could be found in the most unexpected chapters of life. Min-jun paid the driver with shaking hands, her wedding dress rustling like whispered secrets as she stepped onto the cobblestones. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy of ginkgo trees, casting everything in gold and shadow. This was the moment, the choice that would define every moment that followed. The bookshop door chimed softly as she entered, and the familiar scent of old paper and new possibilities wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Jae-hyun sat at their usual table in the corner, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he stared at his hands. He wore a simple white shirt and dark jeans, so different from the formal attire of her world, yet somehow more real than anything she'd known. When he looked up and saw her in her wedding dress, standing in their sanctuary, his entire face transformed. Relief, joy, and something deeper than love flickered across his features, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You came," he breathed, rising so quickly that his chair scraped against the wooden floor. "I came," she confirmed, and saying it out loud made it real, made it true, made it irrevocable. He moved toward her slowly, as if she were a beautiful dream that might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he reached her, his hands, those skilled carpenter's hands that had built her bookshelves and her dreams, cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "You look," he began, then stopped, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "You look like a bride." "I was supposed to be," she whispered, leaning into his touch. 15 minutes ago, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle. The weight of what she had done, what she was doing, settled between them like a living thing. She had left her groom at the altar, abandoned her family's expectations, chosen love over everything else that had ever mattered in her world. Min-jun, he said her name like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of every story that had ever ended with, "and they lived happily ever after." "Are you sure?" "Because once we do this, once we choose each other, there's no going back." She thought of her mother's words, of the life of security and respectability that stretched ahead like a golden highway. She thought of Woo Bin, standing alone at the altar, and the way he had offered her freedom, even as it cost him everything. She thought of the empire her family had built, the expectations that had shaped her since birth, the safe and predictable future that was slipping away with each heartbeat. "I'm sure," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I choose you. I choose us. I choose love." The kiss that followed was soft and desperate, tasting of tears and joy and the kind of love that poets spent lifetimes trying to capture in words. Around them, the bookshop seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls understood the magnitude of the moment they were witnessing. When they finally broke apart, Jae-hyun pressed his forehead against hers, their breathing synchronized like two people who had finally found their rhythm. "I have a plan," he whispered against her lips. "I have money saved, enough for us to start somewhere new. We can go to Busan or even further. I can work anywhere, and you—" "I don't need a plan," she interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I just need you." But even as she spoke, her phone rang again. This time, it was her father's personal number. The sound cut through their moment like a blade, and reality crashed back in waves. "I have to take this," she said quietly, stepping away from Jae-hyun's embrace. "Min-jun." Her father's voice was controlled, dangerous in its quiet intensity. Where are you? Daddy, You have 30 minutes to return to the hotel. We will reschedule the ceremony. Explain to the guests that you needed a moment to compose yourself. The Park family is understanding. I'm not coming back, she said, the words feeling strange and powerful in her mouth. Silence stretched between them, heavy with 24 years of love and expectation and the weight of disappointed dreams. You don't understand what you're doing, he said finally. This isn't just about you, Min-jun. This is about our family, our legacy, our obligations to people who depend on us. I understand perfectly, she replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. I understand that I can't live a life that isn't mine. And what about duty? What about honor? What about the promises we made? What about love, she countered, looking across the bookshop at Jae-hyun, who was pretending to read, but clearly listening to every word. What about the promise I made to myself to be happy? Happiness is a luxury we can't afford, her father said, echoing her mother's words from earlier. Come home, Min-jun. We'll work this out. I am home, she said quietly and hung up. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, charged with possibility and consequence. Jae-hyun looked up from his book, his eyes questioning. They'll come for us, she said simply. My family, Woo-bin's family. They'll try to find us, try to convince us to go back. Are you afraid? He asked. She considered the question, searching her heart for the answer. I'm terrified, she admitted, but not of them. I'm terrified of living a life where I never get to wake up next to the person I love, where I never get to choose my own dreams. Jae-hyun stood and walked to her, taking her hands in his. Then we run, he said simply. We pack what we can carry, and we go somewhere they can't find us until we're ready to face whatever comes next. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the bookshop windows like nature's applause for the choice they were making. Min-jun looked down at her wedding dress, so beautiful and expensive and symbolic of everything she was leaving behind. I need to change, she said, laughing through sudden tears. I can't run away in a wedding dress. Actually, Jae-hyun said, his eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that had first made her fall in love with him. I think running away in a wedding dress is exactly the kind of thing that makes the best stories. And for the first time in her life, Min-jun felt like the author of her own story, ready to write a love that no one would accept, but everyone would secretly envy. 6 months later, Min-jun woke to the sound of ocean waves and the scent of salt air drifting through their small apartment window. The morning light painted everything in shades of gold and possibility, and beside her, Jae-hyun's breathing was steady and peaceful. His arm was draped over her waist, and she could feel the calluses on his hands from his work at the local carpentry shop in this small coastal town where nobody knew their story. They had run that night, leaving Seoul in Jae-hyun's old truck with nothing but 2 suitcases and the wedding dress she'd changed out of in the bookshop's tiny bathroom. The dress now hung in their closet, transformed from a symbol of obligation into a reminder of the night she chose to become the author of her own life. Busan had welcomed them with the anonymity of a city large enough to disappear in but small enough to build a new life. Min-jun had found work at a small publishing house, her literature degree finally serving a purpose that brought her joy rather than duty. Jae-hyun's carpentry skills were in demand, and he spent his days building beautiful things for people who appreciated craftsmanship over prestige. Their apartment was tiny compared to the penthouse she'd grown up in, but every piece of furniture was chosen with love. Every photograph on the wall told a story of their choosing. The bookshelf Jae-hyun had built held her growing collection of poetry books, and the small kitchen table where they shared simple meals felt more luxurious than any 5-star restaurant she'd ever known. Good morning, beautiful, Jae-hyun murmured against her neck, his voice still thick with sleep and contentment. Good morning, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. Even after 6 months, she still felt a flutter of amazement when she woke up next to him, still couldn't quite believe that this was her life now. They had faced the storm together. Her family had cut off her financial support, removed her from the company succession, and publicly disowned her choice. The Seoul newspapers had run stories about the runaway heiress for weeks, speculating about her whereabouts and her motives. Woo-bin had been gracious in public, claiming mutual agreement to end the engagement, but she knew the cost to both families had been enormous. I have something for you, Jaehyun said, reaching into the bedside drawer and pulling out a small, wrapped package. Min-jun sat up, her heart skipping as she recognized the careful way he folded paper. A skill that spoke to his attention to detail, his belief that even simple things deserve to be beautiful. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted with the same care he put into everything he made. Open it, he said, his voice carrying a note of nervous excitement. Inside the box, nestled in soft velvet, was a ring. Not the massive diamond solitaire that had been chosen for her engagement to Woo Bin, but something infinitely more precious, a simple band of white gold with a small, perfect pearl at its center. It's not much, Jaehyun said quickly, his words tumbling over each other in his nervousness. I know it's not what you're used to, and I know your family would think it's inadequate, but... It's perfect, Min-jun interrupted, tears streaming down her face. It's absolutely perfect. I found the pearl myself, he continued, his confidence growing as he saw her reaction. Remember that day we went to the beach, and you said you'd never seen anything as beautiful as the way the morning light hit the water? I went back later and dove for hours until I found this one. It reminded me of that light, of that moment when you looked so happy and free. He took the ring from the box with trembling hands. Min-jun, I know we can't have the big wedding or the social approval or any of the things that traditional couples have, but I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you were that morning on the beach. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them like a prayer, and Min-jun felt her heart expanding to hold all the love and possibility and hope that this moment contained. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, and it fit perfectly, not just the size, but the weight of it, the way it looked against her skin, the way it felt like it had always belonged there. They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony on the beach where he'd found her pearl. The officiant was a kind old man who asked no questions about their families or their pasts. Min-jun wore a simple white dress she'd bought at a local boutique, and Jaehyun wore the same white shirt and dark pants he'd worn the day she chose him. Their witnesses were Mrs. Park from the flower shop and Mr. Kim from the carpentry workshop, new friends who had welcomed them into their small community with open arms and no judgment. As they exchanged vows with the ocean as their cathedral and the sunset as their stained glass, Min-jun felt a peace she had never known in her previous life. This was love without conditions, commitment without contracts, a future built on choice rather than obligation. I promise to love you not because I have to, but because I choose to every single day, she said, her voice carrying across the water like a song. I promise to build you a life worthy of the courage it took to choose love over everything else, Jaehyun replied, his voice strong and sure. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering of new friends applauded, and Min-jun felt like she was finally, truly home. That night, in their tiny apartment that felt more luxurious than any palace, they made love with the tenderness of two people who had risked everything to be together. Outside, the ocean whispered its ancient songs of love and loss, and the courage it takes to choose happiness. The next morning brought a knock at their door. Min-jun's heart froze, thinking it might be someone from her old life, someone come to drag her back to the golden cage she'd escaped. But when Jaehyun opened the door, it was only Mrs. Park with a basket of fresh flowers and a bottle of champagne. For the newlyweds, she said with a knowing smile. May your love story inspire all the young people in this town to choose brave hearts over safe choices. As they shared breakfast and champagne with their elderly neighbor, Min-jun realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the grand gestures or expensive gifts of her former life, but simple moments of connection with people who chose to love without reservation. Her phone had been silent for weeks, but that afternoon it buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I saw the wedding announcement in the local paper. I'm happy for you. You chose well. W. Woo Bin. Somehow he had found them, but instead of bringing consequences, he brought peace. She showed the message to Jaehyun, who smiled and kissed her forehead. He's a good man, Jaehyun said. He deserves his own chance at this kind of happiness. Min-jun looked out at the ocean, thinking of the life she'd left behind and the life she'd chosen to build. There would be challenges ahead, moments when she would miss the security of her old world. But she had learned that the only security worth having was the kind that came from being truly known and loved for who you were, not what you represented. That evening, as they walked hand in hand along the beach where they'd been married, Min-jun felt the weight of her pearl ring catching the last light of the day. She had run away from an arranged marriage and found a love that no one in her old world would ever understand or accept. But here, in this small coastal town, surrounded by people who believed in the power of choice and the beauty of authentic love, she had found something infinitely more valuable than approval. She had found herself. 2 years later, Min-jun published her first novel, a love story about a woman who chose her heart over her heritage. The book became a bestseller, inspiring countless readers to examine their own choices between duty and desire. In the dedication, she wrote, "For Jae-hyun, who taught me that the greatest luxury is not wealth or status, but the freedom to love and be loved for who we truly are." They still live by the ocean, where the waves whisper daily reminders that some storms are worth weathering for the calm that follows. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage, love, and the beautiful choices that define us. Share your own love story in the comments below. We read every single one.